Welcome to China Tech Talk, a weekly discussion of technology and startups here in China. I'm John Artman, editor-in-chief of TechNode, and as always, I'm joined by Matthew Brennan, founder of China Channel. So this week, it's just Matt and I. We're going to be discussing a little bit about some recent news about mobile payments and looking a little bit at what's happening between Alipay and WeChat Pay. But one of the things that really kind of got us going on this topic was a recent feature that Alipay is testing out at KFC, and it's pretty funny because when Matt proposed this topic, I was a bit grumpy about it because for me, I just don't really understand why it's such a big deal. But Matt seems to think that it is. So Matt, looking at the Smile to Pay feature that Alipay introduced at KFC, I mean, it's gotten a lot of coverage so far. We chose not to cover it on TechNode because, again, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. But why? Why is it a big deal? Try to convince me on this one.
Oh, John, major mistake there. You didn't cover it. To be honest, Smile to Pay, I think, is a good jumping off point for this topic that we want to cover today about sort of how Alipay, WeChat Pay are disrupting retail banking in China. And Smile to Pay is interesting. I actually agree with you, John. I think it's not a bigger deal as people make out, but it got a lot of press coverage because it just looks cool. Essentially, the idea is cool, right? It's just paying with your face or smiling to pay is essentially, a really interesting concept. And Alipay released a short video there, and in the Chinese, at the end of the video, they're talking about how, this is the future, and you don't even need a phone when you're in the future. You won't even need to take your phone. You just go into a store, grab something, and smile at the camera, and then you've paid. Stuff like that, which is, a very interesting concept, I think. Obviously, we're not there yet. We're very far away from that. And maybe that's not the direction. Actually, personally, I don't think that's the direction it's going to go in anyway. I think it will be phone-based, to be honest. But it is interesting that they've got a workable demo out. Tencent isn't very far behind in this area, to be honest. They actually won a competition in facial recognition technology, and so they've got quite a strong team in sort of facial recognition as well. But Alipay's been the first one to bring it to market, and it's got big global coverage. Perhaps it is a big deal about nothing in terms of this has been possible for a while. I think they demoed it on a stage, right? I remember Jack Ma demoing it. When was that, John? That was quite a while back.
That was a while back, yeah.
Yeah, so they've demoed it before. That might have been a year or two ago in my mind. So it's not anything new, but having a demonstration in KFC, I think is what brought people's attention.
Yeah. The reason I was a bit grumpy about it is in part because this is to their credit in a sense, is that Alibaba has great PR. Obviously,
yes.
as a media worker, we're exposed to their PR people, both internally and some of the agencies that they employ. And look, they're all really good. They're all really good at what they do. And so, when I first saw the Smile to Pay, I immediately rolled my eyes because it feels very much like a gimmick, kind of like what Samsung did with some of their smartphones by putting the touch screen on the side of the phone, in order to try to get people interested. And yeah, it is a cool feature, but it's not that big of a deal. And I think that one of the reasons that it got so much play internationally, all over the place, is number one, because yes, it is a cool feature, but also because Alibaba has a great PR machine in the works. And it's funny because I was actually looking at our website the other day, and I realized that we run quite a bit of Alibaba stories in for better or for worse. So when I look at something like this, I think that to my mind, the problems already start coming up. So for example, smile to pay. So what happens when there's a lot of people in the background lining up, waiting to order? Is it going to work? How big of a smile do you actually have to have? I mean, can you smirk? Can it be like, or does it have to be like a Cheshire cat grin or something like that? And then also, looking at all the problems that facial recognition has for that Chinese developed facial recognition has for non-Chinese people. So I think that, one of the reasons perhaps, I mean, this might sound a little bit bad, but one of the reasons that I think that facial recognition in China is working so well is because of a homogenous gene pool where people in general, I mean, obviously it's not completely true. And yes, of course, there are different ethnicities who live in China with different facial structures, different body types and things like that. But so I think, the thing is, like, you take a Chinese developed facial recognition tool and you apply that to someone like myself, to a foreigner, someone with darker skin, maybe from Africa, and I do have to wonder how well this is going to work. And so, yeah, again, it is a cool feature, but it seems to me that there's still a bunch of problems. And at the end of the day, this recent demonstration at KFC, it was just there to create buzz.
I totally agree that Alipay has great PR, and Alibaba has a great PR. It's not just Jack Ma. I think they're just a very internationally focused company, and I mean, they do things like write their own sort of propaganda reports about how great their features are. It's stuff that the other guys just don't do in China, and they do it in English. And in terms of Alipay and WeChat Pay, internationalizing, Alipay is way ahead. And their PR on it's way ahead of where Tencent are. I don't necessarily. For me, it's not about the technology. Is it going to work or is it not going to work? I think they'll work it out. I mean, it's going to have teething problems, but the AI behind it is just going to get better and better, and it's just a matter of time. I'm more concerned about, is this actually reducing friction? The video demonstration of the Smile to Pay did not actually, in my mind, reduce the friction in terms, or the convenience in terms of making a payment. In fact, it added to it. Now, paying with your phone in China at the moment is literally tap to pay. I mean, it's that convenient. So going from tap to pay to facial recognition is actually takes longer. So there's a question about that: will consumers adopt it? Because it's not actually right now in that demonstration. It's clearly not more convenient than what's available. And then I also have a worry of government control, because I think in China it's once this technology, if this technology becomes widely used, essentially it's going to be used also by the government. So we're going into a place where your face is an identifier for payments and for data that's being used by companies to track you.
Oh, totally.
That same logic applies to the government. So essentially, in a situation where anywhere where there's a camera, you can be tracked. And when I did a bit of research on Smile to Pay, so I looked up what Tencent's doing in this area, and on their website, it's all about like government working together with government agencies to provide government services. But it immediately sort of like that red flag popped up in my mind of like, hang on, this is what this is going to be used for in the future for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I mean that's more of a concern for people here in China, I guess, but globally it's also a concern when your face is essentially being able to recognized by large organizations. It's also going to be recognized by governments, and that means you can't hide. Your personal privacy will be compromised.
Yeah, for better or for worse.
Yeah, exactly.
This reminds me of a story I read about a month ago about a little boy. So a boy and his father, and I can't remember where exactly, but a boy and his father were out. They were in some public square somewhere, and the father lost track of the boy, who's like 3, 4, 5 years old. And the thing is, in China, child kidnapping is not that rare. It happens more often than you might think, and historically, it's been very difficult to track down the kids once they've been kidnapped. And so the father. The first thing that he does is he finds the police, and with facial recognition technology, the police are able to find the last place where the child was and ultimately recover the child. Thank God, and therefore ensuring his safety and making sure that nothing horrible happens, that he's not sold into basically slavery in some type of brick kiln or something like that. And so the thing is, you look at facial recognition technology, a lot of different technology, and the government is actively exploring ways to use this technology, again, for better or for worse. And a lot of it comes down to do with enforcement mechanisms. The Chinese government historically has not been good at creating effective enforcement mechanisms. And so what they're doing is they're looking to technology to fill that gap. A great example is traffic law. You have traffic cameras, pretty much at every single intersection, every single major intersection here in Beijing, and most of that is to make sure that people, not to prevent people necessarily, but to catch them when they are breaking a traffic law, running a red light, taking a turn that they shouldn't, stopping in a place where they shouldn't, and so on and so on. And so the Chinese government obviously is very interested in using technology for this purpose. And then on top of that, this is a gold mine for Chinese companies. If you ever hear this term smart city coming from a Chinese company, more than likely what that means is they're working on some type of surveillance technology for better or for worse. And in a lot of ways, some things could be used to make things more efficient. So maybe at some point down the road, facial recognition payments will actually lower friction. But then also, as you say, it basically gives the government eyes everywhere. And I think the big problem here is that in the U.S., for example, this is obviously going to be a problem, but at the very least, we would have some type of public debate about this. Maybe it would just end up the same, but at the very least, there is that sense of, okay, there is this accountability of what is okay for the government to do and what is not okay. Whereas in China, that debate just does not happen. And I think that's perhaps one of the most disturbing things about it.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. And I don't have any answers for what we should do. But it's coming. But we're talking quite a bit about this facial recognition. Actually, what we really wanted to cover today was about the just payments in general, I think, for Alipay and for WeChat Pay. So this is just one of the new features that they're testing right now. But this whole area is way ahead of the rest of the world in general. And what Alipay and WeChat Pay have been able to do in terms of mobile payments and disrupting the whole retail banking sector in China is very impressive. And I think a lot of people are looking to it and wondering, will any of this really take off in the rest of the world? And there's been a few announcements in this area, especially on the Tencent side recently, about what they're releasing. They're sort of catching up in terms of what they're the features that they're offering for financial services on WeChat to make it more like Alipay. So Alipay's been in this area a lot stronger in this area because of their background in e-commerce, and they launched a product called Yu'er many years back actually. And
I think it was 2014, yeah.
2014, right. And it was super popular when it was launched because it essentially allowed you to store money in your phone, in your digital wallet, your Alipay wallet on your phone, and in a sort of savings account, a virtual savings account that had a much higher interest rate than the banks were offering. And you could remove and put money in and put money out of the Yuanbao account really easily, actually much easier than your bank account. So it was a better service, and a service that allowed you to essentially get a much better return on your money. So it became super popular. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say it was a kind of a game changer for Alipay in my mind. In terms of offering financial products digitally, and WeChat hasn't had that up until now, but only a few days ago there's some articles coming out there that they're beta testing this new feature, which is called Lingqiantong, and it seems to be quite similar to Yuanbao.
Yeah, it's actually pretty interesting because 2014 was the year of the hongbao, the red envelopes for WeChat. That's when they introduced it, and it really took off, and it got a lot of people into the ecosystem for them. And then with Alipay, that was the same year they launched Yuanbao, which got a lot of people into the ecosystem that weren't already there. But it's actually really interesting because when Yuanbao, so Yuanbao and Tencent's products, they leverage the interbank rate. So this is the rate at which banks lend each other money. And so when Yuanbao launched, the rate was at about 6%. Which is, like, as you say, it's quite high, and even then it was quite high for the time. Now, and this is the funny thing, right? Because so many people got into it, and there were other products trying to from other companies trying to leverage something similar, that the government actually had to step in and put a ceiling on the interbank rate, and so now it's at around 4%, a little bit less or a little bit more, at around 4%, and so that's how people are making money. But again, as you say, it is higher than putting your money into the bank. But looking at So just a few words. We'll try not to use them too much to confuse you. So Yuanbao is the product from Alipay that was launched in 2014. In a few years after that, Tencent launched Li Cai Tong, which is a product similar to, but not as seamless as Alipay's. And so what we're talking about today is something called Lingqiantong, which is their most recent. And so Lingqiantong, basically, a rough translation would be easy change, basically. And then Li Cai Tong is easy finance. And so the idea behind Lingqiantong is introducing that seamless, those seamless transactions where basically any money that you leave inside your WeChat wallet, inside what they call your Lingqian, inside the wallet, that will be also used for the interbank rate. And so you can make money. You can get interest off of just having your money sit there, and then you can use it to make payments as you normally would, to send hongbao as you normally would, to put money in, to take money out, do whatever you like. And so as you say, Matt, I mean, it is potentially a game changer for WeChat, and it's super interesting to see how both Alipay and WeChat are attempting to basically be almost parallel services, offering very, very similar products to their users.
Yeah, the Alipay and WeChat Pay, so Alipay and WeChat in general, they overlap in terms of what they offer massively. And there's been, last year, I think it was, Alipay made big moves to try and push into social more. And that mostly failed. And now this year we're seeing big moves from WeChat to move more into payments area and offering better financial services. So we'll have to see how it goes. But these guys are fighting like crazy. I mean, they are the flagship products for Tencent and Alibaba ecosystems, and they are fighting. They are mortal enemies, essentially, in this battle for payments, which is so important for these giants. I think it's no exaggeration to say that payments is the big one in the long term for these companies. They're in such a great strategic position. So if we abstract away and look at it a little bit on a higher level of what's going on with the economy here in China. So the retail banking has been dominated traditionally by state-owned enterprises. I think there's the big four banks, right, in China. There's Agricultural Bank of China, China Construction Bank, Bank of China itself, and what's the other one? ICBC.
ICBC, yeah.
Yeah. So these big four giants, which are essentially owned by the state, and they have traditionally dominated the banking sector. Their customer service is, quite frankly, terrible.
Absolutely horrible.
Yeah, it's a nightmare, right? As a consumer, dealing with banks in China traditionally is just horrible. It's a nasty experience. There's no competition. It's an oligopoly. And there's no competition in terms of the rates that they offer you on savings accounts either. Traditionally, it was essentially a massive. What's the correct economic terminology? I should know because I did my economics degree many years ago. It's a transfer of wealth from consumers over to the banking
to the government essentially, yeah.
To the government essentially, because there's an oligopoly and they're all offering the same low rates. So if you put the rates were so low before that it was something like 2%. Whereas inflation was much higher. Inflation, was considerably higher, in fact. So by leaving your money in the bank, you're essentially losing money. But there was no competition. There was no other option. And this is why Chinese housing sector became so super hot for so long and still is. Because this was the situation for so long in China that saving your money in a bank was really stupid. You were losing money. So everyone and people didn't really have the knowledge or the ability, the accessibility to invest in stocks and shares like people do in the States. I think that's changing now. Well, it has changed, but we're talking 5 years ago. I would say most of the population were not doing that. So housing was really the one obvious area where you could invest your money and get a decent return.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are some really good points. I mean, basically, Chinese people they've been super hungry for investment vehicles.
Yeah.
So you have real estate, which as you say, I mean, it's just absolutely ridiculous. Stocks and things like that. It is starting to take off, although the government is very, very careful about what they allow to happen on the stock market. There was a huge dip a couple of years ago, and the Chinese government had to step in and say, okay, no more trading for today. I think that they've also curbed short selling. So basically, short selling, if you're not familiar, basically that means that if people are trying to make money on the stock price going down, right? And so that sometimes can actually force a stock price to keep declining and have some pretty and could have some negative effects on the overall market. So yeah, I mean, Chinese people are very hungry for some type of investment. And I think that's also one of the reasons that there is a bit more of an entrepreneurial spirit in China as well, is because people need to make their money work somehow. And so maybe they're investing it in real estate, or maybe they're investing it in their own business, or perhaps even someone else's business. So
these Alipay and WeChat Pay now, they're able to mop up in this area because the offerings from the central bank and the traditional retail banking sector are so bad, and the experience, they're not customer centric at all. They're not customer focused. So they've been able to come in, and if we use like WeChat as an example, so before Lucky Money took off, which, as we mentioned earlier, started around 2014, 2015, when that really started to take off. WeChat Pay is essentially piggybacking off the banking sector, because in order to make it work, you have to link your bank card. So you first need a bank account, right? You can't really make big transactions. You can make small transactions with Lucky Money, but you can't do anything significant without linking a bank card. And the same goes for Alipay in terms of how their app works. You have to link a bank card. So both of these are connected to the traditional banking sector. They're piggybacking off it right now, but they own the customer touch point now. They, as a consumer in China, I don't need to deal with my bank that much anymore. I can do everything through my phone on these two apps. And so the banks have been abstracted away into a middleman almost in this sort of new paradigm. Whereas before I would have to go to a cash point quite often. And so I've got I might have more contact with my bank for other stuff. If I'm using Alipay or WeChat Pay for my financial products, for investment, for my savings account, for transactions peer-to-peer, and for buying stuff in stores, where do the banks actually fit into this in terms of the relationship with the customer? Well, the answer is they don't. And although they are still involved because the whole thing is built around their banking, linking that card, all the money's coming from the banks right now. That's the situation right now. But what we're seeing here with Li Taitong opening up and Eurobao being there, and also there's been a new development with WeBank as well, which is Tencent online bank offering cards which can be linked together with WeChat. We're starting to see the first moves from Tencent's side into what is the obvious long-term play for them, which is to cut the banks out, right? And that's what the banks are really scared about, because that's the obvious thing for these guys to do, because they own the customer touch point and they have the user habits, and these guys have banks as well. Tencent has WeBank, Alibaba has their bank as well, officially internet banks, right, which are officially licensed from the government. So they're able to offer financial services legally, and they have the massive user bases built up now. They don't need the banks anymore, right? They've got everybody using their systems. But I think probably their main concern is more government now. The government the government wants control of it. And actually, there was some changes on WeChat Pay recently where now when for peer-to-peer transactions before, that money was going into WeChat and going from people, and the government wasn't really able to track it very well. They had to rely on Tencent to give them that information. Whereas now they're setting up a new system where when you transfer even peer-to-peer on WeChat, that goes through a third-party platform, which is controlled by the government. From a user perspective, I don't think it changes anything. But from the back end, it means that the government knows what's going on, essentially. Yeah. So they're offering, they're making these kinds of changes to the system because there's been such massive innovation in this area over the past few years. The government really hasn't been able to keep up with what's going on. And we've talked about this before, right, with bike sharing and stuff. Like the government has a little bit of hands off and kind of like, and then comes in with the regulation a bit later. So we're seeing more regulation in this area for sure, because there's been a huge shift in terms of where consumers invest their money and how they transfer their money in the past few years.
Well, I think it's really interesting because if you look at so for example China acceding to the World Trade Organization. One of the really interesting reasons that the Chinese central government wanted to accede to the WTO in the first place was to actually put pressure on domestic policy so that they actually could improve it in certain ways. And so what we're seeing, and you see the government do this in a lot of different areas, because the Chinese governance is actually very, very interesting. There's a saying in Chinese, the mountains are high and the emperor is far away. And I think that a lot of what we're seeing these days, on the one hand, is China, the central government, trying its best to make sure that people in the provinces and in cities are actually doing what the Chinese government the central government wants them to do. And on the other hand, they're using like this kind of market forces almost, so external forces, to implement policy changes or to create changes in the market so that they actually don't need to make any formal policy about this. And so I think that's kind of what we're seeing with these internet banks. One of the big problems with a state-owned bank is that they're very, very risk averse. And so what that means is they're going to give loans to larger companies, and in most cases, those larger companies are going to be state-owned as well. And so a lot of the capital, a lot of the money from the banks and loans and things like that are going to go to the bigger companies. Maybe we can talk a little bit about shadow banking, which is a big deal. But shadow banking in a lot of ways arose because of SOEs, because of state-owned banks being a bit too risk averse and over controlling money in a sense. And so what these internet banks do is they're now creating a lending market for small to medium enterprises, and ultimately what they're going to do is put pressure on the larger banks to actually reform, to make some changes within their service. And even if they don't, well, Alipay and Tencent, at the very, very least, they're filling in that gap that these larger banks just are not willing or are not able to actually enter themselves. And so I think on the part of the government, it's really, really smart because they don't actually need to do very much. They can just say, hey, we're just going to let this, as you say, we're going to let this develop because actually this could solve some problems for us. And then once it really begins to develop, then once it actually some of the more systemic problems are a bit more obvious, then when we're going to come in and regulate to make sure it doesn't get completely out of control. Because I don't think ultimately WeChat Pay or Alipay, their internet banks or their services, I don't think ultimately they are actually going to threaten the big banks. I think that the government still has a vested interest in making sure that these big banks still do exist, but perhaps it's going to be, a splitting off between, what is consumer facing and what is business facing. And so you'll have the
exactly.
state-owned banks being in charge of, these large loans, making sure, money supply issues and things like that. And then the internet so internet banks are actually just more consumer facing, and they're taking care of all of the Chinese consumers.
Yeah, I would totally agree. But what we're talking about is with regard to that last point, because what we're talking about here is retail banking, consumer banking. It's not, and that's just one part of the banking industry. So. Yeah, it's pretty amazing what's happened. Essentially, a messaging app is now controlling 40% of the third-party online payments market. When we look at what's happened in China in this space, I think Alipay and WeChat Pay, just broadly speaking, have had it lined up for them because. And I don't want to make it so that it's just these guys innovating. Actually, the fintech sector in China, in terms of online services for like peer-to-peer micro lending and things like that, is very, very vibrant. And there's lots and lots and lots of startups and people doing very interesting things in this area. But for what we're talking about today, I think we're just focusing mostly on Alipay and WeChat Pay and Tencent, Alibaba, because they're the big guys. What they've been able to achieve is so impressive here in China, and there's a question is, why is that? What are the factors that have enabled them to do this, and would it work outside China? Is China a window into the future of what's going to happen? Are we going to see WhatsApp becoming a payment service and introducing peer-to-peer transactions in the same way as WeChat has, for example? Is that possible in other parts of the world? These are the questions that people are asking.
Yeah, it's really interesting questions as well. I mean, WhatsApp, they're introducing, something very similar to, so they're introducing enterprise accounts, so that businesses can talk directly with their customers and things like that as a business. And so rather than, hey, I'm the customer service person of this company, and I'm trying to help you as a customer fix a problem, rather than doing that from my personal account on WhatsApp, I can now do that from my business account, which is interesting. And then Apple, there with iOS 11. They're introducing peer-to-peer transfers through iMessage via Apple Pay, and so that's becoming more obviously that's going to be a bit more ubiquitous. We've talked a bit before about kind of how some of the things that Apple are doing and whether or not it's good strategy on their part, whether or not they're going to be successful with it. But I think the fact that Apple is introducing something like this does show that there is this potential internationally for it. And I think also one of the big questions is not just like, are these Western providers going to be, doing this internationally? Where's the space for Alipay and for WeChat to offer this internationally? They've been expanding pretty aggressively, mostly so far on the backs of Chinese tourists, but especially in Southeast Asia, they are looking at the underbanked, the underserved as entry points to directly offering their services.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the strategy of working from Chinese tourists first is a pretty obvious one. It's interesting how WeChat's, in particular, their strategy has changed from 2012 being in 2013, going internationalizing and going for consumers as a messaging app, a sort of program that broadly failed. And now they're coming back in 2016, 2017 with quite a different strategy of going after payments. But as we alluded to earlier in the podcast, Alipay is quite far ahead in this area, actually, of internationalizing. But we're seeing a flurry of deals happening this year in terms of payment providers, that people like Stripe, for example, teaming up with both WeChat and Alipay to integrate them into their payments options. So once they get around to serving all the tourists around the world of where they are, that's the sort of low-hanging fruit, as it were. Then they can start to do some more interesting stuff and really try to replicate what's happened here in China in other parts of the world. I think you're right. The underbanked, the underserved in other sort of developing markets would be a good place to start.
I mean, my biggest question though is, as we've been talking about, throughout this episode, is going to be regulation. And whether or not non-Chinese financial regulators or governments are, how comfortable they're going to be with Chinese companies mediating online transactions. So that's actually a big question for me, because when we look at Southeast Asia, when we look at some other countries, more and more, these are part of kind of China's sphere of influence, if you will. With the One Belt One Road, they've made a lot of overtures about helping these countries and so on and so on. With loans, infrastructure, and so on and so on. So I think that regulators may be a bit more friendly when it comes to actually allowing Alipay and WeChat again to mediate these transactions. But I do have to wonder, when we're looking at the EU, when we're looking at Europe, when we're looking at the United States, how welcoming are these countries, the governments and the people, going to be about having a Chinese company doing that and having access to so many to bank records, to transaction records, to bank accounts and things like that, and with now, as you say, the clearing. So all peer-to-peer transactions need to be cleared by the People's Bank of China, by a third-party regulator. Is that? What's the implication for that when they're dealing with foreign bank accounts? Is all that information going to go back to the PBOC as well? And so these are really, really interesting questions, I think. And so, as you say, I mean, like the low-hanging fruit really is the Chinese tourists, because it's just setting up that relationship between the merchant and the customer. But then when we're talking about actual, what if it's a German citizen buying something from a German merchant? How is that going to work?
Yeah, there's a variety of factors here or challenges rather, that they're going to have. And to answer your point there, I think, that nobody's going to agree, but for information going back to China, they know that that's just going to be a complete PR disaster if they need to do that. I could see this being more a case of them investing in local market, best-in-class leaders in terms of the space, and then transferring their technology, their know-how, and their money over to those guys to make a bigger impact in the market, in their local market, and hopefully follow in the same footsteps as what they've been doing. But it seems most other markets, especially the States, it seems just so fragmented. In terms of what's going on. In China, the dominance that these two giants have over the mobile internet really gives them such a massive advantage. They can roll out a feature, and pretty much everyone who's got a mobile phone in China knows about it, and that we can't discount that power that makes it so much easier to do things here in China. And then we've got a population that is just totally addicted to their mobile phones and don't really use other devices to do stuff. And then the home turf advantage of just understanding the consumers better, and then having all these relationships set up with all the authorities and governments, bodies that they need to. So all of this stuff works against them once they go outside China. They really have to partner up, in my mind. I think we've seen them a flurry of investments also in this area, right? MoneyGram was one of the big ones, right, in the States. So that strategy, I think, would make a lot more sense. And also, they've just been able to build the user habits so well in China. I think I wrote a piece recently about the how Tencent's using charity as essentially as a payment, as an incentivization mechanism for building habit of using mobile payments. So rather than for a long time, they've been using cashbacks, mini cashbacks for people who use their mobile payment platform to buy things offline in sort of typically convenience stores. But now they're heavily pushing this sort of charity coins, where you can when you use their payment service, WeChat Pay, you get these sort of virtual coins which you can donate to charity, and that's essentially their version of what Alipay's been doing for a long time. They've had this feature called Ant Forest, which again is incentivizing payments through. Every time you buy something with Alipay, you can get some nutrients to nurture this virtual tree, and when the tree gets big enough, they'll actually plant a real tree in the Mongolian desert. And Ant Financial has made a huge PR deal about this, how they've planted millions of trees in Inner Mongolia. But essentially, it's PR in my mind. It's just it really is. It's actually kind of sickening how they've hammed it up so much, because it really is just a cheap way for them to incentivize more people using mobile payments. They just worked out that psychologically that affects people, and it's cheaper than offering cashbacks.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, as you say, because I mean, also with the Tencent charity drive, I mean, it was, you could donate as little as 1 renminbi and you would get this this painting. And what's actually really cool, again, I think it's that this painting, it's all virtual. You know, and so that was actually really cool. So for 1 renminbi, I can get this virtual reprint of a painting that a young child did themselves. And so it's not like, okay, I'm going to pay a certain amount of money to get a real thing, but I'm going to pay a certain amount of money to get this virtual thing, and then I'm going to post it on my WeChat Moments. not only to show how good of a person I am. So in the parlance, it's called virtue signaling. So I can go to my moments, I can virtue signal, and then other people are going to want to get on board as well. And so I think that this is the really cool thing about how WeChat and the payments and all this stuff kind of ties together, is that it's so easy for them to also leverage the social aspect of WeChat, both the public moments, the news feed, but then also the private chats as well. And so there's so much synergy there. It's really mind blowing if you think about it. But I think that it's also interesting to see, as you say, how they're exploring different ways of incentivization. And I think that more and more, as China goes through this quote unquote consumption upgrade, I think you're going to see this more and more, because people aren't going to be so fixated on getting the best deal or making sure that they're saving so much money. Rather, they're going to be looking for things that make them feel good. And as you say, planting trees or supporting some type of child-focused charity. I mean, it of course it always makes people feel good. But as you say, I mean, we talked about this earlier. We mentioned it earlier. But what's really interesting to me is that on the one hand, it is a bit fragmented in the sense that you have WeChat Pay and you have Alipay, two very separate ecosystems. I mean, as far as I can tell. So unless something huge happens, I mean, they're never actually going to work together. And so you do have these two very, very separate ecosystems, but then just how similar they are to each other. And so you look at both with the financial products, both with these charity incentives. Both, Alipay has tried to introduce a social feature that ended up, to comedic effect. If you're interested in learning more, I'll link to an article that details some of the problems. And now they're also trying to copy the mini programs from WeChat. And so, I really do. It's one of those things, like, you look at the progress that WeChat has made since they first started doing payments. You have to remember that that WeChat as a product has only been around since 2011. I mean, I say only, but that's a short time compared to how long Alipay has been around. So WeChat as a product has been around since 2011, and the WeChat Pay has been around since about 2013. And so in 4 years, they're almost equal to the user base of Alipay. And so it's super, super interesting to see how Alipay is trying to catch up. So WeChat is trying to catch up with some of the financial products, but then Alipay is trying to catch up with some of the other social features, including the mini programs.
Yeah, in terms of users, WeChat Pay always they quote 600 million now, and Alipay quote 520. 520 users. It's on their website. I checked it like last week. I was a little bit confused by that, because usually the industry standard is to say monthly active users, right? That's what people quote, not users. Users doesn't really mean anything to me. It could be registered users. It could be, I think it's deliberately quite vague. Anyway, the number they quote is 520, I believe, million users for Alipay. Essentially, Alipay, I think in their PR stuff, anyone who uses Taobao and anyone who uses Tmall to buy anything is essentially an Alipay user in terms of how they count it. And from WeChat's PR side, in my mind, anyone who's sent a Hongbao is a WeChat Pay user in terms of how they count it. So, I don't think I think their numbers are a little bit inflated. If I have no proof of that, so but it just from my observations that both of them are sort of in a PR war right now internationally to say that they have the more users. But mini programs is an initiative from WeChat that Alipay has also launched recently, and they actually got caught copying code for it, which was quite funny. And maybe we can link to an article on that for a little bit more of a deeper dive into that if you want to know. But essentially, the Alipay team got copy and code from WeChat team, which I imagine happens a lot in the Chinese internet space. These giants all have spies in each other's teams, and there's a lot of copying goes on. I don't think copying is necessarily a bad thing, so I I actually don't really like using the term that much. Inspired, perhaps, is inspiration. They've gained inspiration is a better thing, because it really, in the internet space, it's everybody copies, right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing. But here, maybe the boundaries have been overstepped in terms of, like, they literally did copy and paste code, which I don't know actually that's what the legal implications of that are, but nobody really talked about that in any of the stuff I read online regarding that, or when I spoke to people about it, nobody seemed to be bothered about the legal implications of that in China. I think it's just a sort of open industry secret that that's what goes on between these companies, is that they do have moles and spies and secrets and code between them goes back and forth.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I think it was just one of those surprising PR failures on the part of Alibaba. I think, as we said, their PR is great, but it's super interesting to see how people react to this stuff, because on the one hand, it makes their life so much easier, but on the other hand, they're willing to jump on them for some bad things that they may or may not have done.
I actually had one or two people suggest to me that this was a kind of reverse PR thing from Alipay, and I think there's certainly, I can't prove anything, but it does kind of make sense. Actually.
What do you mean from Alipay? You mean from WeChat?
I mean, like that Alipay. This is actually Alipay assessed. So this is the theory. Okay, it's complete theory. Okay, I'm not saying this is true,
right?
But it does make sense that Alipay who are also launching many programs and know that everybody knows they're copying Alipay anyway. It's obvious, right? So they don't need to worry about anyone claiming that. But they do need to worry about how we're going to get people to actually talk about our mini programs, right? Is like a problem they've got, because essentially they're completely copied and pasted. There's nothing new here, and there's very little to talk about, essentially. So what better way than to do something like this, where, oops, sorry, we got caught copying code, guys, just to get people to talk about it and actually get people trying to use their mini programs and thinking about it just in terms of mind share, having that. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but hey, it kind of makes sense, I guess. I wouldn't be surprised, that some of the campaigns, the marketing campaigns that happen in the Chinese internet space are completely messed up.
Yes, exactly. Well, exactly. And things have gotten a bit cleaner, but as we talked with Kaiser a few episodes ago, the PR market in China can be a bit murky, and there definitely are some shady things going on. Whether or not this was one of those shady things is an interesting question. I think that the theory that you just proposed about, hey, maybe this was just a way to get more mind share is pretty compelling. As you say, we have no evidence to back up any theory about this specific story, but I think it does make sense, and I think that this is one of those things where I really have to kind of wonder what Alipay is trying to do, because with WeChat has social in it. It has this kind of platform in it already. I mean, WeChat is a platform to do a lot of things, whereas Alipay, it's a tool for payment. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to introduce these social features. They're trying to introduce, all these other platform-like features. And I have to wonder if that's good strategy on their part. I mean, WeChat introducing new financial products. Well, I mean, let's face it, financial products aren't that difficult. Because it's money, it's numbers. Maybe the difficult part is how do you market it, not necessarily how do you execute it. Whereas with these social features and other types of things, trying to make Alipay more of a destination rather than a tool, I mean that's very difficult. And I have to wonder again if it's good strategy on their part and whether or not they're just kind of wasting their time on it.
I wouldn't say doing payment stuff is easy. I think there's massive technical challenges involved from speaking to people on Tencent side for this. It is, I remember speaking to the Li Taitong team at last year briefly about the Tencent credit system, and I was totally expecting them to have that out last year. but they didn't have it. It's still in beta testing. Admittedly, credit scoring is particularly difficult, right? So that's actually something we haven't talked about. So for the listeners who don't know, Alipay actually has a massive advantage in the payments area because it has a credit score, a rating system called Sesame Credit that is widely adopted, and people use that for a variety of ways now. For example, bike sharing is a good example, right? So like for Alipay's cooperation with OFO, they're able to leverage Sesame Credit so that people with fairly decent credit rating scores don't need to pay deposits for the bikes. So it's actually got a massive advantage for in that particular bike sharing use case. But Tencent's been way behind on this, and I was fully expecting them to have something out last year, and it's obviously a lot more difficult than that. They're not holding back because just to be slow. These guys are trying to move as fast as possible, but it seems that maybe it's not just technical challenge, maybe it's regulatory challenge and things like that. But obviously when they launch it as well, they need to get it right first time. There's not going to be a second chance. If they mess up their credit rating system somehow, then it's going to be much more difficult to get people to use it a second time.
Yeah, completely. And so my point wasn't necessarily to imply that somehow it's that the technical side of all this stuff is necessarily easier. But I think that my point here has more to do with user habits, has more to do with because relationships are complicated. They're strange. Things, people are weird. Something that on paper internally it looks good. You launch it and like, oh my gosh, this doesn't work at all. And so when it comes to Alipay's strategy in terms of trying to copy or trying to do similar things that WeChat is doing in terms of social, or in terms of, again, making it a destination, making it a platform, rather than just a tool, it feels like it's kind of taking them kind of away from what Alipay is really good at, which is being a tool. You take out Alipay when you want to pay for something, when you want to manage your finances and things like that. And whereas WeChat, again, it is that platform. And so again, I'm not trying to say that technically it's easy. All I'm trying to say is that users and user habits are very difficult.
Yeah, user habits are the key, for sure. People have the ingrained habit of using WeChat for social and QQ for social, and they don't need another social app, really.
Right.
Most people, and that's a huge problem for Alipay. But having said that, people also have the ingrained habit of if I want to invest in financial products or make large transactions, then I use Alipay.
Exactly.
So that's their massive advantage over WeChat. To be honest, most consumers, they look at WeChat Pay as something that's used for smaller transactions and used for peer-to-peer. If they're going to make a serious purchase, they'll break out Alipay. And personally, as a user, I use both for payments, and I do feel that Alipay has got a better user experience in terms of managing money, and just small things like every month it gives you a report on the money you've spent, where you spend it and what days you spend it on, and you can break down that data. That's little stuff like that is on my Huawei phone. I can tap to pay with it. I can't do that on WeChat. Things like that. So the user experience for payments on Alipay is definitely better than WeChat. And the user habits and just the sort of mind space in terms of I need to make a payment. Okay, Alipay is the default payment app
exactly
that I'm going to use. That's embedded in Chinese people's minds. So they do have a massive advantage also that WeChat doesn't have. And let's be honest, they're sort of trailblazers in this area. So Alipay has, WeChat is very much riding off the coattails of what Alipay has been able to do in sort of building people's familiarity and being comfortable with making not just mobile payments, but from back in the day, online payments in general. When Taobao started, the escrow system and using Alipay, it was revolutionary. And then when they were competing with eBay way back in the day, they were really what they did was massively innovative. and they've single-handedly sort of dragged online payments into the Chinese mindset and made it popular through the work they did many years ago.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, and that's kind of my point. I mean, because it just seems like they're losing focus a little bit. And for me, I think that companies really should focus on what they're good at and improve their core product. 80-20 rule. 80% of your returns are going to come from 20% of what you do. So we want to make sure that 20% is focusing on the really, really good stuff, the stuff that you're really good at, the stuff that you already have that user base for, and building a moat around it.
Conversely, you could have argued the same for WeChat years ago. You could have said, why is WeChat trying to be a payments app?
Right, that's a good point.
That doesn't make sense. Like, just stick to social, guys. But just by having that there, I think actually what I've worked out with these internet companies, the big guys, and give you another example. Tencent has actually an operating system called Tencent OS. I think it's called Lanjin, right? Blue Whale, and nobody uses it. Nobody uses their operating system. I don't know a single person that uses Lanjin, but they have it. They have a division there, and they have an operating system. And if one day there's an opportunity for them to move into operating systems that opens up, they'll be much better prepared than if they didn't have that division, right? And so I think a lot of it is especially for the big guys, making sure that they have some product in this area. They know that it's got very few users, but it's a starting point that we don't know where things go in the internet space. Nobody could have predicted that WeChat would become such a big payments platform 4 years ago, but now it is. And by having Tenpay there, which again wasn't that great, was getting killed by Alipay 5 years ago, but they had Tenpay there. Okay, they were using it for other stuff like payments in games and stuff, which is pretty important, but they, having these divisions which are in all these different areas does have that benefit that they're able, when suddenly there's a game-changing shift somewhere in the ecosystem, they're much better prepared.
Well, I think that's actually a really good point. So I think that really, I mean, in terms of long-term strategy, WeChat Pay was super smart for Tencent, because what they're doing is they're building an ecosystem. They're building social entertainment, gaming ecosystem around all of their products, and they're monetizing directly off of that, either via subscriptions for their music and for their video stuff, or for in-app purchases, things like that for their gaming. And then, of course, the financial products inside of WeChat. But I think that really, it makes a lot of sense, because you think about the discussion they were having, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, where they say, okay, look, we see this trend of people willing to pay for stuff. We can get people to start paying for stuff, but do we really want to have Alibaba processing those transactions? Do we really want to have Alipay, in the middle of our relationship, our financial relationship between us and the user, between us and the people paying us for stuff? And the answer, I think, was no. So I think that's actually perhaps one of the big reasons they wanted to have this financial service, this ability for people to pay, is so that they can keep every single thing in house. I mean, obviously, they still have to pay Apple for the transactions that happens through Honor of Kings and things like that. But everything else it's all through them. It's all first party, and they can control everything. As it turns out, that's all the time we have for this episode. If you enjoyed it, we would really appreciate it if you left a review on iTunes, or if you're in Overcast, you can hit the star button. If you're in Pocket Cast, you can hit the recommend button. It's a great way to show your support.